Fruit bats are fairly common in the forests of West Africa, and villagers in some remote areas eat them. But experts say they can carry Ebola and transmit it to humans. In fact, bats are believed responsible for a host of recent disease outbreaks, including Marburg virus, an outbreak that's underway right now in Uganda, and an earlier one in 1976. MERS, that's the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome outbreaks in Europe and Africa, the most recent one in 2005. A SARS outbreak on the Arabian Peninsula in 2012 and 2013, and almost annual outbreaks of Nipah virus in Bangladesh. Well, to better understand how bats can carry and transmit so many deadly diseases, we turn to Bob MacLean via Skype from New Orleans, where he's senior veterinarian with the Audubon Nature Institute. When you add it all up, it's extraordinary. Nipah, Marburg, MERS, SARS, Ebola, and some rabies cases all finding their way to humans through bats. What is it about bats?
Well, we don't know exactly what it is about bats. There are a number of theories, however, that perhaps some of these viruses or these types of viruses are quite old, and the bats may have co-evolved with them over eons. Some of these are newer versions of those viruses, but the bats may have the ability to harbor them without showing any clinical signs.
And these are not just bats in one specific region. Marburg was initially discovered in Marburg, Germany. Think about MERS, we think about the Middle East. You think about SARS, you think about Asia. You think about Ebola, you think about West Africa. It seems to be that these are very different threats moving from very different parts of the world, once again, through just one mammal.
And again, we don't know exactly. There are a couple of theories. One, it may be related to their body temperature, where they live during hibernation, or perhaps even during flight when their body temperature rises. These viruses have evolved to handle the higher body temperature, such as a fever, and therefore more virulent in humans. This is many people around the world are studying this phenomenon, but we don't know really why it is to date that they're able to harbor so many virulent pathogenic diseases without showing illness themselves.
And how do those diseases get from bats into people?
Well, in cases of Ebola, for example, bushmeat was thought for the previous outbreaks to be the primary way it got into people. It would first probably get into apes, perhaps antelope or other animals of the forest, through either direct contact with fruit bats that harbor the disease, or potentially eating off the same fruit that the bats were eating off of. Then the animals are harvested by humans. They're touching the uncooked meat, bringing it into the cities, and therefore coming down with disease. The cooked meat is not a problem. The most recent outbreak in West Africa, I understand epidemiologists think it may be a single point source contact with a fruit bat. However, that seems to be more rare. Indigenous peoples, since before civilization, have been eating bats and fruit bats, and the transmission of the disease does seem to be rare directly from the bat.
So what can people do? We use insecticide to get rid of dangerous insects. Can we get rid of bats?
Well, I don't think that's a good idea. Part of which is perhaps only 1% or less of those bats are carrying the dangerous pathogen. Other than that, some bats in their own ecosystem are essential. Fruit bats are many of which are primary pollinators in their ecosystem. So you get rid of the bats, you might get rid of the fruit. That's probably not a good idea.
Let me ask you one last question. Bats are common all over the world. People are afraid of them for all kinds of reasons. And I hate to think we're going to make them even more afraid. How nervous should people be if they're walking along a dark road, or if they're with their families or youngsters, they're swimming, whatever? How scared should we all be of bats, even knowing what we've just heard?
You really need direct contact with the bats, and that's very rare to have direct contact between the bats and humans. Certainly with Ebola, I've overheard some concerns about bats in areas where Ebola isn't endemic. you would have to have transmission from an infected human directly to the bat, and I think that is very unlikely. So limiting contact, direct contact with bats is usually a good idea anyway because of the diseases that they do harbor, but direct contact is rare.
Bob MacLean of the Audubon Nature Institute, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.